The city was quiet, but it wasn't the kind of peaceful quiet that lets you rest. It was the tired hum of a place that had been working all day and was now taking a deep breath before starting all over again. It was late, past 2 in the morning, and the streetlights cast long, yellow shadows on the pavement. Keanu walked down the sidewalk, his hands deep in the pockets of a worn-out leather jacket. He didn't look like a movie star right then. He didn't look like someone who had been in blockbuster films or graced the cover of magazines. He just looked like a man who couldn't sleep, a man looking for a cup of coffee and a moment of stillness in a chaotic world. He turned the corner and saw the neon sign of the diner buzzing softly. It was an old place, the kind that stays open 24 hours just for people like him, night owls, nurses getting off late shifts, and people who needed a place to think. He approached the entrance, the glass sliding door parting automatically with a soft hiss. The smell hit him instantly. It was the scent of burnt coffee, frying bacon, and sweet syrup. It was the smell of comfort. Keanu walked in and slid into a booth in the back corner. The vinyl seats were cracked and taped up, but they were comfortable. He pulled his baseball hat down a little lower, not to hide from fans, but just to shrink into himself a bit more. He wanted to be invisible tonight. He wanted to just be another person in the room. A waitress walked over to his table. She looked to be in her 50s, with tired eyes that crinkled when she smiled and a pad of paper in her hand. Her name tag said Lisa. She didn't recognize him, or if she did, she didn't let it show. She treated him like any other customer coming in at this hour. "What can I get you, honey?" she asked, her voice raspy from talking all night. Keanu looked up and offered a small, polite smile. "Just a coffee, please. Black, and maybe some toast." "Coming right up," Lisa said, scribbling it down and walking away. Keanu sat back and looked out the window. The streets were empty except for a taxi driving by now and then. He felt a heavy kind of tiredness in his bones. It wasn't just from lack of sleep. It was the weight of life, of years moving fast, of carrying memories around like stones in a pocket. He closed his eyes for a moment, just listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the clinking of silverware in the kitchen. Then it happened. It started as a small twinge in his stomach, like a muscle cramp. He shifted in his seat, thinking it would go away if he stretched a bit, but it didn't go away. Instead, it got sharper. It was a sudden, gripping pain that made him gasp quietly. He opened his eyes and put a hand on his abdomen, pressing down, trying to massage the ache away. Lisa came back with the coffee and toast. She set the cup down gently. "Here you go. You okay? You look a little pale." Keanu looked at the steam rising from the cup. He didn't want to worry her. He didn't want to be a burden. He was used to toughing things out, to pushing through pain, whether it was on a movie set doing stunts or just dealing with life's bumps. "Yeah, I'm okay," he said, his voice sounding a bit tighter than usual. "Just a bit of indigestion, I think." Lisa didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "Well, take it easy. I'll be around if you need anything." She walked away to wipe down the counter. Keanu took a sip of the coffee, but the moment the hot liquid hit his stomach, the pain flared up again, this time much worse. It felt like a knife twisting inside him. He put the cup down hard, his hand shaking. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, breathing in short, shallow gasps. He told himself to calm down, that it would pass. But the pain was relentless. It was radiating now, shooting up his side and down into his legs. He looked at the toast, but the thought of eating made him feel sick. He knew he couldn't stay here. He didn't want to make a scene. He just needed to get back to his hotel, maybe take some medicine and lie down. He reached for his wallet to leave a tip, but his fingers were clumsy. He fumbled with the leather, his vision starting to blur at the edges. Keanu gripped the edge of the table and tried to stand up. He pushed himself up, but his legs felt like jelly. The room tilted to the left. The bright lights of the diner seemed to grow dim, then incredibly bright, flashing like a strobe light. A wave of dizziness washed over him so strong that he had to grab the back of the booth to keep from falling. "Whoa!" he whispered to himself. He closed his eyes tight, trying to reset his balance. Lisa must have seen him struggling, because he heard her voice calling out from across the room. "Honey, you need some help?" Keanu tried to wave her off. "I'm fine," he choked out. Just gonna head out." He took a step away from the table, but that was a mistake. The pain spiked to a level he had never felt before, a white-hot flash that stole his breath completely. His knees buckled. He couldn't hold his weight up. He felt himself falling, but everything was in slow motion. He saw the floor rushing up to meet him, the black and white checkered tiles spinning. He hit the ground hard. The impact knocked the air out of him, but the pain in his stomach was so overpowering that he barely noticed the floor. He curled up on his side, instinctively pulling his knees to his chest to protect himself. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't speak. He could just hear the rushing sound of blood in his ears and the frantic movement around him. "Tom, call 911. Now!" Lisa's voice was sharp and loud, cutting through the haze. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Lisa. She was kneeling beside him on the floor. She wasn't worried about the dirty floor or the other customers. She was just worried about him. "Hey, stay with me," she said softly, her face close to his. "Don't try to move. Help is on the way." Keanu looked up at her. His vision was swimming, but he could see the genuine fear and care in her eyes. He felt terrible. Here he was, a stranger, causing a panic in her place of work. He felt like he was ruining her night. He struggled to find his voice, forcing the words out through gritted teeth. I'm so sorry," he whispered. "So sorry." Lisa shook her head, squeezing his shoulder gently. "Hush now. Don't you apologize. You're sick. Just breathe." The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder as they got closer. The red and blue lights began to flash through the glass windows of the diner, painting the walls in moving colors. The cook, a big man named Tom, came out from the kitchen with a towel and a cup of water, looking worried. Keen tried to focus on Lisa's face. She was talking to him, telling him he was going to be okay, keeping him grounded while the world spun out of control. He lay there on the hard floor, surrounded by the smell of coffee and the flashing lights, feeling small and helpless. But amidst the pain and the embarrassment, there was a strange comfort. He wasn't alone. In a city of millions, where people often walk past each other without looking, he was here on the floor, and someone was holding his hand, making sure he wasn't forgotten. The pain was still there, tearing at him, but the fear began to fade just a little, replaced by the warmth of a stranger's kindness. The sound of the sirens grew louder, cutting through the quiet night air until they were right outside. The red and blue lights swirled violently across the diner windows, painting the faces of the few customers who were still staring in shock. Within seconds, the glass entrance slid open and a team of paramedics rushed in, bringing with them a gust of cold wind and a sense of urgent authority. Keanu was still on the floor, curled up tight, trying to breathe through the searing pain in his abdomen. He felt a hand on his shoulder, gentle but firm. It was a young man with a mustache, wearing a dark blue uniform. He knelt down right next to Keanu, blocking out the flashing lights so he could focus on his face. "Hey there, can you hear me?" the young man asked. His voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice you want to hear when things are going wrong. "My name is David. We're going to take good care of you. I need you to look at me." Keanu forced his eyes open. His vision was blurry, and sweat was dripping down the side of his face, matting his hair to his forehead. He tried to nod, but even moving his head hurt. He felt so weak, so helpless. It was a strange feeling for a man who was used to being in control, used to standing on his own 2 feet, no matter what life threw at him. "Yeah, I can't hear you," Keanu managed to whisper, his voice rough and barely audible. David nodded quickly and started checking his pulse, looking at his watch to count the beats. "Good. Stay with us. We're going to get you moved to the stretcher. Okay? It might be a little uncomfortable, but we'll be as gentle as we can." Another medic, a woman with kind eyes and a strong grip, positioned herself near his head. On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, they lifted him together. A sharp groan escaped Keanu's lips as his body left the floor. The movement sent a fresh wave of agony ripping through his stomach, so intense that his vision went white for a second. He gasped, clutching the side of the gurney as they strapped him in. He felt ridiculous, lying there strapped to a bed while everyone watched. He turned his head slightly, looking for Lisa. She was standing near the counter, her hand over her mouth, looking worried. He wanted to tell her he was sorry, that he would pay for the broken plate or the mess, but he couldn't get the words out before they were wheeling him out. The cool night air hit his face as they exited the diner. It was a stark contrast to the stuffy, painful heat he felt inside his own body. They lifted the gurney into the back of the ambulance. David climbed in after him, pulling the heavy doors shut with a loud metallic thud that sealed them into a small, brightly lit box. "Okay, let's get a line in," David said, moving efficiently. He prepared in 4-bag. As the ambulance began to move, the siren wailing again, the vehicle swayed and bumped over the pavement. Every bump sent a jolt of pain through Keanu, making him grit his teeth. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to focus on anything other than the twisting knife in his gut. He heard the hiss of the oxygen mask they placed over his face and felt the cold sting of the 4-needle going into his hand. It was all a blur of medical sounds and sharp sensations. But then, through the haze of pain, Keanu opened his eyes. He looked up at David. The young paramedic was busy adjusting the flow of the 4, checking the monitors, and writing on a clipboard. He looked intense, focused, but also incredibly tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his shoulders were slumped slightly, as if he was carrying a heavy weight on them. Maybe he had been working for 12 hours straight. Maybe he had seen too many bad things tonight. Keanu watched him. Even though he was the one lying flat on his back, the one in agony, his heart went out to this stranger. He knew what it was like to work long hours, to give everything you have until you're running on fumes. He hated seeing someone look so worn out. David looked down, surprised to see the patient looking at him so intently. He expected fear or anger or panic. That's what most people felt in the back of an ambulance. But Keanu's eyes were soft, filled with a strange kind of empathy. "You're doing great," David said automatically, putting a reassuring hand on Keanu's arm. "Just hang in there. We're almost there." Keanu reached up slowly, his hand trembling slightly, and patted David's hand. He didn't pull it away. He looked the young man right in the eyes and took a shallow breath. "You look really tired," Keanu whispered, his voice muffled slightly by the mask. "Long shift." David froze for a second. He blinked, completely caught off guard. In all his years of doing this job, nobody had ever asked him how he was doing while they were being rushed to the hospital in agony. Yeah, David stammered a little, his professional guard slipping just a fraction. "It's been a long one. Double shift." Keanu squeezed his hand weakly. "Thank you for being here, for taking care of people. It matters." David stared at him for a moment, the beeping of the heart monitor filling the silence between them. The cynicism that builds up over years of emergency work seemed to melt away for just a second. He saw past the patient, past a medical emergency, and saw a human being who was concerned about him. Thank you," David said softly, his voice cracking just a little. He cleared his throat and went back to work, but his demeanor changed. He was even gentler now, checking the straps with extra care, smoothing the blanket over Keanu's chest. "We're going to get you fixed up, okay?" The ride continued, but the feeling in the small space had changed. It wasn't just a patient and a medic anymore. It was two people sharing a difficult moment, looking out for each other. Keanu closed his eyes again. The pain still there, still terrible, but the fear was less. He felt safe. He felt connected. The ambulance hit a pothole, and Keanu flinched, a small grunt escaping him. "Sorry about that," David said immediately, reaching out to steady him. "Road's a bit rough." "It's okay," Keanu breathed out. "Not your fault." He thought about the randomness of life. One minute you're eating toast in a quiet booth, and the next you're speeding through the city in the back of a van, holding hands with a stranger. It was scary, but there was beauty in it, too. The world was full of people like David and Lisa, people who stepped up when things went wrong, people who cared. The driver's voice came over the intercom. 2 minutes out. Trauma 1 is ready. David nodded to himself. "All right, we're almost there. You're doing really well. Just stay with me." Keanu focused on the rhythm of his own breathing, in and out, matching the beep of the machine. He thought about the morning sun that would be coming up soon. He hoped he would see it. He hoped David would get some sleep soon, too. The van slowed down, turning sharply. The tires screeched slightly on the pavement. They were there. The hard part was just beginning, but for this brief ride through the dark city, Keanu had found a way to not just be a patient, but to be a friend. And that made the pain just a little bit easier to bear. The ambulance came to a sudden, jarring halt, throwing Keanu slightly against the safety straps. The back doors flew open and the cool night air rushed in again, but this time it was mixed with a distinct, sharp smell of antiseptic and rubbing alcohol. They had arrived at the emergency room. It was a chaotic blur of motion. David and his partner unclicked the latches and guided the gurney out of the van, wheeling it quickly toward the bright glass entrance that slid open automatically to welcome them. Once inside, the atmosphere changed completely. The quiet hum of the city was replaced by the beeping of machines, the rolling of wheels on hard floors, and the urgent voices of doctors and nurses shouting out orders and numbers. It was a world of controlled chaos, a place where life and death hung in the balance every second. The lights were incredibly bright, fluorescent, and harsh, making Keanu squint as they wheeled him down a long, white corridor. He felt dizzy. The medication they had given him in the ambulance was starting to take the edge off the pain, replacing the sharp, knife-like sensation with a dull, heavy throb. But he also felt incredibly floaty, like he was detached from his own body, watching the scene unfold from above. He closed his eyes for a moment to stop the room from spinning, listening to the squeak of David's shoes on the polished floor. We've got a male, mid-50s, severe abdominal pain, probable rupture or obstruction. David was saying to a team of people waiting for them. Vitals are stable, but he's in a lot of distress. They whisked him through a set of double doors and into a large, open intake area. This was a holding zone, the place where patients waited to be moved into a trauma room or a treatment bay. It was crowded. Every bed was full, and people in various states of distress were lined up in the hallways on gurneys or sitting in plastic chairs. It was the kind of place that tested your patience and your faith in humanity. As they waited for a bed to clear up, the movement stopped. The gurney was parked near the nurse's station, right across from a row of blue plastic chairs. Keanu opened his eyes and tried to focus on his surroundings. The pain was still there, a constant background noise that made it hard to think. But his heart was suddenly drawn to a figure sitting just a few feet away. It was an elderly woman. She looked tiny in the big chair, her feet barely touching the ground. She was wearing a knitted shawl over a floral dress, and she was clutching a large, old-fashioned leather purse in her lap with both hands, as if it contained her entire life savings. But it was her face that broke Keanu's heart. She was crying softly, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks, but she was making no sound. She was just staring at the floor, looking completely and utterly alone. She looked terrified, lost in a big, scary machine of a hospital. Keanu watched her. He knew that feeling. He knew what it was like to feel small in a big world, to feel like you are just a number in a system that doesn't have time to care. He saw the fear in her hunched shoulders, the way she wiped her eyes with a crumpled tissue and looked around nervously, hoping for a friendly face, but seeing only busy nurses and hurried orderlies. He couldn't stand it, even with his own body screaming in pain, even with the uncertainty of what was wrong with him hanging over his head. He felt a pull to reach out to her. He knew that a single moment of kindness could change the entire night for someone. He knew that sometimes just knowing you aren't invisible is enough to help you keep going. David was busy talking to a nurse at the desk, filling out paperwork. Keanu took a shallow breath and shifted his weight slightly. He raised his hand, the one with the 4-tube taped to it, and waved it just a little to get David's attention. "David," Keanu whispered. His voice was weak, raspy. David turned around immediately, looking concerned. "Yeah? What do you need?" "More pain meds." Keanu shook his head slowly. "No. Wait just a second." He motioned with his chin toward the woman. David looked over, confused for a moment, then looked back at Keanu. Keanu didn't say anything else. He just looked at the woman with such intensity that David understood. He stopped pushing the gurney and stood still, giving Keanu a moment. Keanu turned his head fully toward her. He didn't have the energy to shout, and he didn't want to make a scene. He just waited. The woman must have felt someone looking at her, because she slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were red and puffy. She looked at the gurney, expecting to see a nurse or a doctor giving her an order to move. Instead, she saw Keanu. He looked pale and sweaty, his hospital gown already on, wires coming off his chest. He looked like he was in worse shape than she was, but his eyes were kind. They were warm and full of a gentle understanding. He caught her gaze. He didn't look away. He slowly nodded his head at her. It was a small, simple gesture, but it carried so much weight. It was a nod that said, "I see you." It said, "You are not alone." It said, "We are in this together, and it's going to be okay." The woman stared at him, stunned. She stopped crying for a second. She squeezed her purse tighter and blinked at him. Then, seeing the reassuring look in his eyes, her expression softened. She realized that the stranger, who was clearly suffering himself, was taking the time to acknowledge her pain. She took a deep, shaky breath and nodded back at him. A small, fragile smile touched her lips. She wiped her face one last time and sat up a little straighter, as if his silent encouragement had given her the strength to face whatever was coming. Keanu offered a very faint, tired smile back, just a quick curving of his lips, before his energy ran out. He slumped back against the pillow, exhausted by the effort. David, who had been watching the whole exchange with a look of awe on his face, leaned in close. "You're something else, you know that?" he said softly. "Most people would be screaming for drugs right now, and you're comforting the waiting room." Keanu closed his eyes, feeling the heaviness return. "Nobody should have to cry alone," he breathed out. Just then, a nurse in blue scrubs hurried over to them. "Okay, we have a bed open in Trauma 3. Let's move him." The gurney jerked forward as they began to wheel him away. Keanu kept his eyes closed as they moved through the maze of corridors, heading toward the treatment room. He was leaving the waiting area behind, leaving the noise and the crowd, but the feeling of that connection stayed with him. He felt a strange sense of peace amidst the pain. He had helped someone, even if just for a second. They burst through a set of swinging doors and into a smaller, more private room. The lights here were even brighter, focused directly on the bed. A team of doctors and nurses was waiting, looking serious and prepared. "All right, let's get him transferred," a doctor said. "On my count, 1, 2, 3. They lifted him from the ambulance gurney to the hospital bed. The movement sent a fresh wave of nausea through him, and he groaned, clutching his stomach. I know," the doctor said soothingly, placing a hand on Keanu's shoulder. "We're going to take good care of you. We need to run some scans and get that pain under control." Keanu lay there, surrounded by strangers in scrubs, poking and prodding him, attaching new monitors. It was scary and uncomfortable, but as he drifted in and out of consciousness, he saw the face of the old woman in his mind. He saw her smile. He hoped she would be okay. He hoped someone would be kind to her, too. As the doctor began to examine him, Keanu realized that even in the darkest, most painful moments, we have a choice. We can focus on our own misery, or we can look out and try to make the world a little softer for someone else. And that second choice, he decided, was the one that mattered most. The curtain surrounding his bed was a pale blue, thin enough that he could see the shadows of people moving frantically on the other side. The noise of the emergency room had died down a little for him, muffled by the heavy fog of the medication they had pushed through his foreline. The sharp, tearing agony in his stomach had dulled into a throbbing ache that radiated through his entire body. It wasn't gone, but it was bearable now. He could finally breathe without gasping, though each breath still felt like a heavy lift. Keanu stared up at the ceiling tiles. They were white with small speckles, a pattern he had seen 1,000 times in movies, usually from a gurney perspective. But lying here in real life was different. In movies, the drama was in the dialogue and the music. In real life, the drama was in the silence and the hum of the machines, and in the feeling of being incredibly small in a system designed to fix broken bodies. He heard the soft squeak of rubber shoes on the linoleum floor approaching his bed. A nurse pulled back the curtain gently. She was younger than the waitress from the diner, maybe in her early 30s. Her name tag read Kate. She looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled back into a tight ponytail, but loose strands were falling out around her face. There were dark circles under her eyes that looked like bruises, and her movements were quick and mechanical, the kind of efficiency you develop when you've been on your feet for 12 hours straight. "Okay," Kate said, her voice low and professional. She didn't look him in the eye right away. She was focused on the monitors. "Let's check these vitals again. The doctor is reviewing your blood work, and we should know something soon." How's the pain scale now? 1 to 10. Keanu watched her as she checked the pulse oximeter on his finger. She was trying to be gentle, but her hands were trembling slightly from fatigue or maybe too much caffeine. He could feel the stress coming off her in waves. She was carrying a heavy load, probably dealing with difficult patients, staffing shortages, and her own life problems all at once. It's about a 4, Keanu said quietly. Maybe a 5. The medicine helped. Thank you. Kate nodded, jotting something down on her clipboard without looking up. Good. We'll keep an eye on it. Try to rest. She turned to leave, ready to rush off to the next emergency, the next fire that needed putting out. But Keanu couldn't just let her walk away. He knew that feeling of running on empty, of giving everything you have until there's nothing left. He saw her not just as a nurse, but as a human being who needed a moment of acknowledgement. Hey, Kate, he said softly. She stopped and turned back, a polite but tired smile fixed on her face. Yes? Do you need something for nausea? A blanket? No, I don't need anything, Keanu said, shaking his head slowly against the pillow. I just wanted to say, you look really tired. Kate blinked. The professional mask slipped for a second, replaced by a look of genuine surprise. People didn't usually ask the nurses how they were doing. Patients were usually the ones demanding attention, caught up in their own suffering. She let out a short, dry chuckle and leaned against the metal rail of the bed. Yeah, she admitted, her shoulders dropping an inch. It's been a long shift. Double, actually. My relief called out sick, so I'm pulling extra hours. It feels like this night is never going to end. Keanu looked at her with eyes full of understanding. I know that feeling, he said. When you're running on fumes, but you have to keep going because people are counting on you. Exactly, Kate said, sighing. She looked down at her clipboard, then back at him. It's just, sometimes it feels like you're pouring water into a bucket with a hole in the bottom, you know? You fix one thing, and 3 more broken things come through the sliding glass doors. She didn't know she was pouring her heart out to a celebrity. She just saw a kind face in a sea of suffering, a face that felt safe enough to be honest with. Keanu listened intently. He didn't offer empty cliches like it'll get better or hang in there. He just let her speak. He knew that sometimes the best medicine isn't a pill. It's just being heard. You're doing important work, Keanu said, his voice serious and sincere. I know it feels like a hole in the bucket right now, but you're the one holding the bucket. You're the one keeping the water from spilling. That matters. Kate looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. She saw the sincerity in his eyes. It wasn't just a patient trying to be nice, so he would get better treatment. It was a deep, soulful truth. She felt a sudden lump in her throat, a tightness that had nothing to do with her tired muscles. Thank you, she whispered. She took a deep breath and wiped the stray hair away from her forehead. I really needed to hear that tonight. It's been a rough one. We lost a patient earlier, an older man. It gets to you sometimes. I'm sorry, Keanu said gently. That's a heavy weight to carry. You can't save everyone, but you gave him comfort when he needed it most. That's what you did. Kate stood there for a moment, absorbing his words. The chaotic noise of the ER seemed to fade away, the beeping machines and shouting voices becoming background noise. In this small, curtained-off space, there was a moment of grace. She realized that this man, lying in a hospital bed in pain, was healing her. You're a good listener, Kate said, a small, genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. It changed her whole face, making her look younger and less weary. I should let you rest. I'll check on you in a few minutes. Take your time, Keanu said. And Kate, yeah, take a deep breath, even if it's just for 5 seconds. Just for you. Kate nodded. I will. Thanks. She pulled the curtains shut as she left, but she didn't rush off immediately through the thin fabric. Keanu could see her shadow standing still for a moment. He watched the silhouette as she took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling slowly, just as he had suggested. Then she turned and walked away, her step a little lighter, her posture a bit straighter than before. Keanu closed his eyes and let out a long breath of his own. The pain in his stomach was still there, a constant companion, but his heart felt full. He realized that hospitals weren't just places of physical healing. They were places where souls collided. You had people who were hurt and scared, and people who were tired and trying to help. In the middle of all that pain, there was space for kindness, for a simple exchange that reminded both of them that they were human. He drifted in and out of sleep for a while. Time was strange in the hospital. Minutes could feel like hours, and hours could feel like minutes. He dreamed of floating in the ocean, the water rocking him gently, far away from the sharp lights and the smell of antiseptic. When he opened his eyes again, the lights in the room seemed a little dimmer. The shift change must have happened. A different nurse was walking by outside, but he thought of Kate. He wondered if she had gone home to sleep, or if she was still out there fighting the good fight. He hoped she had taken another deep breath. He hoped she knew that her work meant something to the people lying in these beds. Lying there, staring at the speckled ceiling, Keanu felt a profound sense of gratitude. He was grateful for the medicine that was stopping the pain, yes, but he was more grateful for the connection. In a city of millions, where people often ignored each other on the street, he had found a moment of real intimacy with a stranger. He had been able to look past his own misery and see someone else's, and in doing so, he had forgotten his own pain for a little while. It was a beautiful trade-off. The night was still dark, and he was still stuck in a hospital bed, but he didn't feel alone anymore. He was part of the shared human experience, messy and painful, but full of love. The first light of morning was beginning to creep into the room, not as a brilliant sunrise, but as a pale, gray wash that filtered through the blinds. It was a quiet time in the hospital, the shift between the chaos of night shift and the bustling energy of the day. The constant noise of the emergency room had settled down to a low hum. Keanu opened his eyes, blinking slowly as he adjusted to the dim light. He felt heavy, his body sore and aching from the ordeal, but the sharp, tearing pain that had brought him here was gone, reduced now to a manageable throb that the medication kept at bay. He lay still for a moment, just listening to the rhythm of his own breathing and the beep of the monitor that tracked his heart rate. It was steady now. He had made it through the night. A doctor, a man with kind eyes and silver hair, came in a few minutes later and checked him over one last time. "You're stable," the doctor said, flipping through the chart. "The test showed what we suspected, and we've treated it. You need to rest for a few days, drink plenty of fluids, and take it easy. But you're going to be okay." Keanu nodded, a wave of relief washing over him. "Thank you," he said, his voice still a little raspy. "Thank you for everything." The doctor left, and a nurse came in to remove the 4-line from his hand. It was a strange feeling, being untethered from the machine. He sat up slowly, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. His feet touched the cold floor, sending a little shiver up his spine. He felt weak, like a newborn colt trying to stand for the first time, but he was determined. He reached for his clothes, which had been folded neatly on a chair. Putting them on was a struggle. Every movement required effort. His ribs felt bruised, and his limbs felt heavy. But there was something symbolic about pulling on his worn-out jeans and his T-shirt. It was the act of putting his own skin back on, of returning to the person he was before the pain took over. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, slowly tying the laces of his boots. It took him a while, his fingers fumbling with the knots. But he didn't rush. He focused on the simple task, grounding himself in the present moment. When he was finally dressed, he stood up. He swayed slightly for a second, grabbing the bed rail to steady himself, but then he found his balance. He took a deep breath. He was standing. He was walking. He was alive. He walked out of the room and down the long hallway. The corridor was different now. The frantic energy of the night had dissipated. The floors were shiny and clean, reflecting the morning light. A few cleaning staff were mopping the floors, and a couple of nurses were chatting quietly at the desk. It felt like a different world than the one he had entered through the glass entrance just hours ago. He approached the nurse's station to sign his discharge papers. The charge nurse, a woman with gray streaks in her hair and a face full of wisdom, looked up as he approached. She smiled when she saw him. "Look who's up and walking," she said, her voice warm. "You gave us quite a scare last night." Keanu offered a shy, humble smile. "I gave myself a scare, too," he admitted softly. "I'm just glad I was in such good hands." She handed him a clipboard with the forms. "You were a great patient. The team was talking about you. David mentioned you were quite kind to him. He was the one taking care of me, Keanu said, signing his name with a slow, deliberate hand. He was tired. He deserved a kind word. He placed the pen down on the counter. The nurse looked at him, really looking at him, and seemed to see past the actor, past the public persona, right down to the decent human being underneath. "It's rare," she said quietly. "Most people are angry or scared when they're in pain. You were different." "I just figure we're all in this together," Keanu said simply. The nurse nodded. "Well, we have a policy that requires us to wheel you out to the exit in a wheelchair," she said, gesturing toward a folded chair in the corner. "It's just protocol for patients who were admitted." Keanu looked at the chair, then back at her. He shook his head gently. "With all due respect," he said softly, "I would really like to walk out, on my own 2 feet. I need to feel the ground." The nurse hesitated for a second, looking at the rule book, then at his determined face. She sighed and smiled. "Okay, against protocol, but I think you've earned it. Just take it slow." "Thank you," Keanu said. He turned away from the desk and looked down the long hallway toward the exit. He could see the automatic glass doors at the far end, the bright morning light pouring through them. He took a deep breath and started walking. Step by step, he made his way down the hall. He passed an older man mopping the floor, who stopped and stepped aside, nodding respectfully. Keanu nodded back. He passed a young family in the waiting area, a mother holding a sleeping child. He looked at them with a gentle gaze before moving on. He wasn't walking like a movie star. He wasn't strutting or posing. He was walking like a survivor. He was walking with the quiet dignity of someone who has looked at the dark and decided to walk back into the light. As he got closer to the exit, the staff who had helped him during the night, the ones who were still on duty, paused to watch him go. There were no autographs asked for, no phones pulled out to take a picture. It didn't feel right in that moment. The atmosphere was one of mutual respect. They saw a man who was grateful to be leaving, a man who appreciated the work they did. Keanu reached the glass doors. He stopped and turned around. He looked back at the nurses, the doctors, the clerks. He raised a hand and gave a small, humble wave. Then he brought his hands together in front of his chest and bowed slightly. It was a gesture of deep gratitude, a silent thank you for saving his life. It wasn't for the cameras. It was just for them. The staff stood there, touched by the simplicity of the gesture. They waved back. In that moment, the hierarchy of celebrity and staff disappeared. There were just people acknowledging the shared experience of a difficult night. Keanu turned back to the doors. The sensor picked up his movement, and the glass slid open smoothly with a soft hiss. He stepped out of the cool, sterile air of the hospital and into the fresh morning air of the city. It was crisp and cool, smelling of dew and exhaust fumes and coffee. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the sky. The city was waking up. Cars were driving by. People were heading to work. The world was continuing to spin. He was just a small part of it now. No longer the center of attention. No longer a patient in crisis. Just a man in a jacket and boots. He pulled his collar up against the chill and shoved his hands into his pockets. He didn't call for a car or a taxi. He just started walking. He walked down the street, his gait a little slow, his head down, blending into the stream of pedestrians. He disappeared into the morning crowd, becoming invisible again, exactly as he wanted to be. Inside the hospital, the charge nurse watched him go until he turned the corner and vanished. She shook her head, smiling to herself. "That man," she whispered to the empty room, "that man is something else." She went back to her work, but the memory of his kindness lingered in the air, making a long shift a little bit easier for everyone who had been there. The night was over, but the warmth of a human connection they had shared would last a lot longer than the morning.